There's a comfortable lie that almost everyone believes, that ignoring provocations is a sign of weakness, that remaining silent is losing, that not reacting is accepting being trampled on. Machiavelli would never fall into that trap. In politics guided by reality, not ideals, whoever reacts first has almost always already lost. The world is not governed by emotional justice, but by perception, hierarchy, and instinct. And whoever understands this too early is frightening, because they stop bleeding in public. Perhaps you've experienced this firsthand. A joke that went too far, an innocent comment meant to belittle you, a veiled attack that left you frozen, wondering afterward what you should have said. The problem wasn't a lack of intelligence, it was playing a game that favors the instigator, not the one who explains themselves. The end justifies the means for those who understand true human nature. And the uncomfortable truth is this: reacting emotionally gives the other person exactly the power they want. In this video, you'll learn a dark, silent, and profoundly Machiavellian method to turn the tables. A path where you don't attack, don't argue, and don't expose yourself and still win. Where silence becomes a weapon, control becomes a threat, and the aggressor begins to self-destruct without realizing when it all started. If you're tired of being the target, this isn't a video about kindness, it's about strategy. And after understanding this, you'll never react the same way again. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now, not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He begins by recalling something that almost no one admits aloud. Shame is rarely an accident. Most of the time, it's a social weapon, used with surgical precision by those who understand, even if intuitively, politics guided by reality, not ideals. It's not about right or wrong, it's about power, perception, and position. Machiavelli already warned that the appearance of virtue often hides far less noble intentions. In social, professional, or even family settings, shame functions as a public assassination of identity, a silent message about who is in charge and who bows their head. And the cruelest part, it almost never comes as a direct attack. It comes in the form of a joke, irony, a harmless comment. The brain registers, the body feels, and before the person realizes it, they've entered a game they didn't choose to play. The end justifies the means for the attacker, but almost never for the one who reacts without understanding the game. And that's where the trap closes. The mentor then lowers his tone, almost as if revealing an ancient secret. Reacting is exactly what the system expects. When someone reacts to shame, the amygdala takes over, hijacks reasoning, and pushes the individual toward predictable emotional responses. In the modern social hierarchy, those who react lose because they reveal instability. Decisions based on real human nature show that the group observes less the content of the response and more the emotional state of the person responding. A tense face, a hasty justification, an attempt to explain oneself, all of this signals fragility. Machiavelli would call this a basic strategic error, a lack of virtue in the face of the fortune of the moment. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean aggressiveness, but emotional control. And above all, avoiding being hated involves not putting on a show. Those who react give energy, attention, and validation to the aggressor. And without realizing it, they reinforce the role that has been imposed upon them. That's why he promises something different from what you see out there. Not empty motivational speeches, nor pretty phrases to post. What comes next is a Machiavellian method of psychological reversal based on silence, framing, and a cold reading of human behavior. A path where the calculated use of force is not physical, but symbolic. Where loyal armies are built within one's own mind, where constant adaptability is worth more than wounded pride. Here, shame ceases to be a sentence and becomes a tool. The victim begins to realize that the attack reveals more about the attacker than about the victim. Something changes. The gaze shifts away from the pain and begins to observe the game. And when that happens, a new phase opens up, deeper, more uncomfortable, and infinitely more powerful. He begins by explaining something that completely changes how a person perceives shame. The real attack is not social, it's biological. The instant someone is exposed, ridiculed, or belittled, the amygdala kicks in as if a predator were lurking. The body reacts before thought. The heart races, breathing shortens, the face heats up. It's the reptilian brain taking over, trying to survive the danger of exclusion. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands recognizing this internal hijacking. Those who don't understand this think they've lost control out of nowhere. Machiavelli knew, whoever loses emotional control loses the ability to decide. And decisions based on real human nature show that, at that moment, any response is almost always a mistake. The external attack only works because it finds an unprepared internal system. Understanding this is the first step to escaping the position of prey. In the modern social hierarchy, those who react emotionally fall down invisible rungs. Not because the attack was justified, but because the reaction signals a lack of self-control. The mentor uses a simple example. In a meeting, someone makes a joke about you. If you defend yourself, over-explain, or try to appear cool, the group doesn't evaluate your reasoning, it evaluates your stability. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means being perceived as someone who cannot be easily displaced. The end justifies the means for the attacker because they seek status, not truth. And by reacting, you offer exactly that. Avoiding being hated is not about pleasing, it's about not exposing yourself. The appearance of virtue often lies in appearing calm, even when something has been unjust. Those who understand virtù and fortuna know that there are times to act and times to observe. And this is not the time to act. Then comes the most uncomfortable twist. Shame is almost always projection. The attacker is confessing, without realizing it, their own insecurities. They point out in the other what they fear in themselves. This isn't pretty theory, it's a cold reading of human behavior. When someone tries to belittle you in public, they are trying to climb up using you as a stepping stone. Upon realizing this, something changes internally. The person stops seeing themselves as a target and begins to see themselves as an observer. The calculated use of force here is internal. Not reacting, not absorbing, not personalizing. It's like watching a wounded animal trying to bite so it doesn't bleed alone. Self-contained and loyal armies begin to form when the mind learns not to engage in pointless battles. And when the observer is born, space opens up for something even more disturbing for the attacker: the absolute emptiness of the absence of reaction. Here, the mentor presents what few dare to practice: conscious emptiness. After the amygdala is tamed, the simplest and most devastating technique of all emerges. Silence, 3 seconds, not one more, not one less. The gaze remains, but does not react. There is no smile, no defense, no hurry. This short interval completely disarms the social logic of the attack. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that the human brain hates uncertainty. When you don't respond, the aggressor loses the script. Better to be feared than loved. Here means appearing unpredictable and unwavering. The end justifies the means because the means is silence, and the result is control. The appearance of virtue manifests as coldness, not as aggression. It is at this moment that the hierarchy begins to invert without a single word spoken. The void forces the attacker to sit in their own ugliness. Without an emotional response, they are forced to hear what they just said echo in the environment. It's embarrassing, it's cruel, it's effective. The human mind was shaped for immediate feedback, attack, reaction, validation. When this cycle is broken, the aggressor short-circuits. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who talk too much in the face of silence begin to expose themselves. They try to explain themselves, laugh to themselves, correct their sentence. The shame shifts sides. Avoiding being hated paradoxically means not trying to be accepted at that moment. Virtù and fortuna meet when you understand that not every battle requires movement. The calculated use of force here is letting the other stumble over their own impulse. By not filling the social vacuum, you become something rare, a psychological black hole. Everything goes in, nothing comes out. The aggressor throws energy, provocation, expectation, and receives nothing in return. This generates profound discomfort because the social system depends on emotional exchange. Your own loyal armies begin to form around you because the group observes who maintains control when tension rises. Constant adaptability isn't about reacting quickly, it's about choosing when not to react. The mentor often says that the wind doesn't move the rock, it just passes by. At this stage, you cease to be a character and become scenery. And when someone becomes scenery, the next move ceases to be defensive. It becomes strategic. That's exactly where something even more dangerous for the attacker comes in: psychological judo. Here, the mentor makes something very clear right from the start. Defending oneself means accepting the other's framing. When someone explains, justifies, or rebuts an insult, they are implicitly saying, "Maybe you're right." In politics guided by reality, not ideals, this is seen as a symbolic admission of guilt. The aggressor doesn't need to win the argument, they just need to make the other play their part. Machiavelli already understood that power lies in defining the field of dispute. Better to be feared than loved, in this sense, is to not allow the attack to dictate the tone of the conversation. The calculated use of force appears when you refuse to enter the emotional ring. There is no shouting, no defense. There is displacement. And this displacement begins with something simple, almost innocent, but profoundly destabilizing. Treating the insult as strange behavior, not as a valid offense. The reversal of framing changes everything. Instead of responding to the content of the attack, you comment on the attitude. A neutral, "Are you okay?" or a non-ironic, "That was strange to say," makes the aggressor shift from the position of judge to that of defendant. Decisions based on real human nature show that nobody likes having their behavior analyzed in public. Shame returns to its origin. Avoiding being hated here is not about being passive, it's about being clinical. The appearance of virtue emerges in the form of calm and clarity. Virtù and fortuna walk hand in hand when you understand that you don't need to win, you just need to displace. Your own loyal armies begin to align when the group realizes who maintains composure while the other loses their balance. The attack ceases to be entertainment and becomes embarrassment. Then comes the technique that seems absurd but works like a slow poison. Agree and amplify. When someone says something derogatory, responding with, "I know it's my best quality," completely breaks the expectation. The end justifies the means because the means are paradoxical. By agreeing, you remove the force of the blow. There is no resistance, no impact. The aggressor is left without a foothold. Constant adaptability is this, knowing when to go against and when to go together to win. The mentor usually explains it like in real judo. You use the other person's weight against them. Those who observe understand, even without being able to explain it, that something has changed. You are not trying to prove anything. You are simply showing control. And when control becomes evident, the stage ceases to be the aggressor. It becomes the audience, and it is for them that the game really matters. The mentor now reveals the piece that almost everyone ignores. Shame is never a duel. It's a spectacle. The attack only exists because there is an audience. Without eyes watching, it loses its meaning. In politics guided by reality, not by ideals, it is understood that the aggressor doesn't speak to you, he speaks about you to others. Machiavelli saw this clearly. Power lies not in truth, but in collective perception. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means appearing stable before many, unconvincing before one. The common mistake is focusing on the attacker, when the real battlefield is all around. Avoiding being hated isn't about defending yourself, but about not appearing unstable. Whoever understands this changes the axis of the game without saying a word. This is where the technique of triangulation comes in. While the aggressor is speaking, you don't stare directly at him the entire time. Instead, you calmly and neutrally alternate your gaze between him and other people in the group. This simple gesture communicates something powerful. You don't recognize him as having enough authority to monopolize your attention. Decisions based on real human nature show that the group follows those who demonstrate self-control under pressure. The appearance of virtue manifests as serenity. Virtù and fortuna align when you understand that the audience seeks emotional leaders, not debate winners. Your own loyal armies begin to form when others start to see the aggressor as someone out of place, exaggerated and out of tune. Without confrontation, you begin to isolate him socially. The aggressor feels it in their body before understanding it mentally. Their energy finds no echo. The group doesn't laugh, doesn't validate, doesn't follow along. The end justifies the means because the means are invisible. You didn't need to humiliate, attack, or shout. You simply remained calm. Appearing calm signals leadership. Appearing emotional signals instability. Constant adaptability means knowing that sometimes the greatest counterattack is not appearing attacked. The audience begins to associate you with the rock, and the aggressor with the noisy wind. And when this association takes hold, something changes drastically. The aggressor ceases to be a threat and becomes noise. It is at this point that an even more radical and biologically devastating option emerges. Here, the mentor intentionally pauses before explaining why this phase isn't for everyone. He makes it clear, turning the attacker into a ghost isn't immaturity, it's advanced strategy. In politics guided by reality, not ideals, non-existence is more painful than confrontation. Human beings are biologically programmed to seek recognition, even if negative. When you remove that, the system collapses. Machiavelli would understand this movement as the calculated use of force in its purest form. Better to be feared than loved. Here means being unreachable. It's not about childish silent treatment, but about the total denial of symbolic existence. The aggressor speaks, provokes, insinuates, and doesn't even find a reflection of their own presence. This creates a kind of pain that leaves no visible marks, but destroys the motivation for the attack. The practical application is simpler than it seems, and that's precisely why it's so difficult. You look through the person, not at them. You continue the conversation with others, slightly shift your body direction, maintain a neutral tone, no sign of anger, no sign of revenge. decisions based on real human nature show that social exclusion activates the same brain areas as physical pain. Avoiding being hated involves not showing explicit contempt, just absence. The appearance of virtue remains intact while the aggressor begins to feel irrelevant. Virtù and fortuna align when you understand that not every enemy deserves to be fought. Some only need to be eliminated. Your own loyal armies observe this in silence and learn who deserves attention and who doesn't even deserve a response. Ignoring at this level is biologically more devastating than being attacked because it removes the reward. The end justifies the means when the means is to deprive you of psychological sustenance. Constant adaptability means knowing when to leave the game without announcing your departure. The aggressor tries again, maybe twice, and then begins to wither. No stage, no audience, no reaction. The mentor often uses the metaphor of fire. It only exists as long as there is oxygen. You become the vacuum, and when someone becomes a vacuum for those trying to hurt them, something deep reorganizes internally. The dependence on external validation begins to die. But this phase requires something that almost no one has yet built. Something that comes before any external dominance, a real inner fortress. The mentor begins this phase by dismantling a dangerous illusion. No one can sustain external power without internal structure. All previous techniques fail if self-esteem still depends on the applause of others. In politics, guided by reality, not ideals, those who live in search of approval are vulnerable to any attack. Machiavelli already understood that loyal armies are not improvised. They are built before the war. Here, the construction is internal. Better to be feared than loved begins within when a person doesn't beg for validation. Avoiding being hated involves not provoking, but also not explaining oneself. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who validate themselves transmit stability. The appearance of virtue ceases to be theater and becomes a consequence. The end justifies the means because the means are now emotional autonomy. And autonomy is rare. Shadow work becomes a central tool. Accepting one's own flaws, limitations, and contradictions deprives the aggressor of ammunition. Those who have looked inward don't panic when someone points something outward. Virtù and fortuna meet when a person stops fighting against what they are and begins to integrate. The mentor often reminds us the most vulnerable man hides behind armor. The more rigid the persona, the easier it is to break it. Constant adaptability requires psychic flexibility. A simple example: write down, without filters, everything you've been accused of in life and coldly ask yourself, what here is true? Books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius or The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday help train this perspective. When the shadow is integrated, shame loses power. It no longer finds a place to fix itself. At this point, something silently changes. The person stops waiting for approval and starts evaluating others. The axis is reversed. The question is no longer, what did they think of me, but was this acceptable behavior? The calculated use of force is now internal and constant. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that those who judge less are judged more. Those who judge with discernment are respected. Self-made and loyal armies are strengthened when the mind learns to position itself as a reference point, not as a beggar. External shame no longer finds an internal echo. And when that happens, space opens up for something few master, not only neutralizing attacks, but choosing when and how to counterattack with surgical precision. The mentor makes it clear from the start. Counterattacking isn't about losing control, it's about choosing the exact moment. In politics guided by reality, not ideals, whoever attacks first doesn't always win. Whoever attacks best wins. Here, there's no emotional explosion, there's precision. The first move is the complete picture. A simple, "Who are you trying to impress right now?" changes everything. The question doesn't accuse, doesn't shout, doesn't justify itself. It exposes. "Better to be feared than loved" appears at that moment with uncomfortable clarity. The aggressor is pulled out of the role of provocateur and placed under the spotlight of intention. Decisions based on real human nature show that nobody likes having their motivations revealed in public. The appearance of virtue remains intact, while the other begins to writhe internally. The end justifies the means because the means are the naked truth, calmly spoken. The second move is the repetition order, one of the most underestimated weapons in existence. "Excuse me, say it again. I didn't understand," said with absolute neutrality. No irony, no smile. This forces the aggressor to repeat the attack, now aware that they are being observed. Virtù and fortuna align when you understand that embarrassment grows with repetition. Avoiding being hated here is not about retreating, it's about allowing the other person to reveal themselves. The calculated use of force lies in creating psychological friction without raising your voice. Your own loyal armies around you perceive the immediate change in atmosphere. The attack loses fluidity. The joke dies in the air. Constant adaptability means knowing that sometimes asking for clarity is more aggressive than accusing. The third move is the most surgical of all, the validation trap. A simple, "I know things are tough for you right now," completely shifts the game. The aggressor expects confrontation, they receive cold compassion. Decisions based on real human nature show that this reversal generates profound confusion. The attacker wants superiority, not understanding. The appearance of virtue manifests as emotional maturity, while the other is reduced to someone unregulated. Machiavelli would understand this as total control of the board. The end justifies the means, because the means is to use empathy as a blade, not as a shield. After this point, the aggressor rarely tries again. But even when they do, something changes in the subsequent dynamic. The attack leaves invisible marks, not on you, but on them. And that's where the silent consequences come in. The mentor explains that all power dynamics only solidify after the attack. It's afterward that the game is decided. Withdrawing attention after the confrontation is the most effective punishment because it breaks the reward cycle. In politics, guided by reality, not ideals, the aggressor measures success by the reaction they provoke. When that reaction doesn't come, the attack dies of starvation. Better to be feared than loved here means being predictably unpredictable. You don't react when a reaction is expected. Avoiding being hated involves neither humiliating nor celebrating the victory. The appearance of virtue remains because you continue your life as if nothing had happened. Decisions based on real human nature show that the brain associates a lack of attention with a loss of status. The end justifies the means because the means are simple, selective focus. Those who don't receive focus cease to exist on the emotional map. Not seeking validation from the crowd is an essential part of this phase. The common mistake is seeking approving glances after the confrontation, as if silently asking, "Did you see how I did?" This returns power to the system you just neutralized. Virtù and fortuna align when a person understands that real authority doesn't need immediate confirmation. The calculated use of force appears in containment. Your own loyal armies observe in silence and internalize the example. Constant adaptability means resisting the temptation to explain, justify, or comment on what happened afterward. The mentor often says, "Whoever revisits the attack keeps it alive. Whoever moves on transforms it into an irrelevant past." The punishment is not verbal, it's symbolic. The aggressor feels they lost something, but can't pinpoint exactly what. Over time, the effect becomes inevitable. The attacker becomes forgettable. no narrative, no reaction, no stage. The shame he tried to sow finds no fertile ground. Decisions based on real human nature show that the group begins to ignore him or treat him as someone without emotional weight. Avoiding being hated at this stage is almost automatic because you haven't positioned yourself as a rival, only as someone out of reach. The appearance of virtue is confused with maturity. The end justifies the means because the means were consistency, and consistency creates a silent reputation. But all this raises a bigger, more uncomfortable question that goes beyond technique or strategy. Why have these tactics become necessary? What has changed in the world so that silence and shadow are tools of protection? That's where we get into the philosophy behind it all. The mentor begins this phase with an uncomfortable realization. These tactics were born not from cynicism, but from necessity. The modern world does not reward emotional naivete. In politics, guided by reality, not ideals, those who expose their own light too much become targets. Machiavelli never romanticized human behavior. He observed it as it is. Decisions based on real human nature show that power and status always attract attempts at attack, conscious or unconscious. Better to be feared than loved here is not about inspiring fear, but about imposing invisible limits. The shadow does not appear because you want to hurt, but because you need to protect yourself. Avoiding being hated requires balance, not becoming an aggressor, but also not remaining vulnerable. The end justifies the means when the means prevent greater destruction. To deny this is to choose to live exposed. Protecting one's own light doesn't mean extinguishing empathy, but rather preventing it from being exploited. The calculated use of force appears when a person understands that not everyone deserves access to their energy. Virtue and fortune align when you know when to advance and when to retreat. Self-reliant and loyal armies are not violent people, but people aware of their own power. The philosophy of the shadow teaches that repressing this side only makes it unconscious and dangerous. Integrating it, on the contrary, creates mastery. The mentor uses the metaphor of the predator. The lion doesn't attack everything it sees, but everyone knows it might attack. This creates order without conflict. Constant adaptability is knowing that the world changes, but human nature remains predictable. Being the monster that keeps other monsters at bay is not an invitation to cruelty. It is a call to responsibility. Those who do not recognize their own capacity to hurt end up being hurt. The appearance of virtue, when not accompanied by strength, becomes an invitation to abuse. Machiavelli would understand this as political maturity. The end justifies the means when the objective is to prevent destroyers from advancing on the weak. Decisions based on real human nature show that respect is born from the combination of clarity and restraint. The integrated shadow does not dominate the person, it serves them. And when someone reaches this point, something definitively transforms. There is no longer a need to prove, react, or win. Only one final stage remains, the closing of this journey. The mentor concludes this journey with a statement that sounds strange at first glance, but impossible to ignore. You were never weak. You just played a game you didn't understand. Along this path, it becomes clear that shame only works against those who still react like prey. When the mind learns to observe, pause, and frame, the hierarchy silently shifts. In politics guided by reality, not ideals, the world doesn't respect intentions, it respects emotional coherence. Machiavelli never taught gratuitous cruelty. He taught a cold reading of the environment. Better to be feared than loved here means not being easily violated. Avoiding being hated involves not humiliating, but also not bowing down. The end justifies the means when the means is self-control. The predator doesn't chase after those who don't bleed emotionally. And those who understand this stop running. The real trap lies not in a sharp response, but in a lack of predictability. Your own loyal armies are built when you act consistently, calmly, and observably. Decisions based on true human nature show that the group follows those who don't fall apart under pressure. The appearance of virtue ceases to be effort and becomes reflex. Virtù and fortuna meet when you understand that not every affront deserves energy. Constant adaptability isn't about changing your personality, it's about choosing a stance. The calculated use of force appears when you know you could react, but don't need to. The aggressor senses this, even without understanding why. And when they sense it, they retreat, not out of explicit fear, but out of instinct. The same instinct that has governed all human relationships from the beginning. From this point on, something definitively reverses. You no longer enter environments to prove your worth, but to observe behaviors. The judgment changes direction. The question ceases to be, how do they see me? And becomes, does this deserve my attention? Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands this silent maturity. The end justifies the means when the objective is to preserve dignity and direction. Shame loses ground, fear diminishes, and respect appears unbidden. The trap was never to attack back. It was to escape the role of prey without announcing the exit. And when someone reaches this point, curiosity naturally arises for something greater. Understanding influence, power, social reading, and invisible attacks at an even deeper level. Now, the inevitable question is simple and uncomfortable. How many times have you surrendered power just to prove you were right? How many times have you reacted, explained, defended yourself, and come out smaller than you went in? Based on everything you've seen here, there's no way to pretend you don't understand the game anymore. Shame, attack, and humiliation only work against those who still react like prey. When you apply silence, framing, and strategic absence, something immediately changes in how the world reads you. Not because you've become aggressive, but because you've stopped being predictable. The real invitation here is not to attack more people, it's to attack less. It's about choosing when to act, when to observe, and when to simply withdraw energy. Think about the next situations in your life, at work, in your family, in social circles. Where do you still over-explain yourself? Where do you still try to appear good, acceptable, understood? Remember, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands self-control. The end justifies the means when the means is to preserve dignity, direction, and respect, not to crush the weak but to keep destroyers at bay. If this video made you see patterns that previously went unnoticed, don't ignore it. Apply it. Test the silence. Observe the emptiness. Use framing. See who changes their posture when you change your energy. And if you want to go deeper, understanding influence, psychological power, social reading, and invisible attacks at a level that almost no one teaches, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you don't learn to react, you learn to control the game.